I think this is in a good spot, and I think you're kind of progressing very well, and just kind of like want to make sure that the face is nice and on model before you kind of start adding any more detail. But I think you are progressing very nicely. So just little things, mainly on these three expressions. So the first thing that I was kind of feeling here was when I sort of looked at this expression. I'm recording, right? Yes. So what immediately kind of jumped out at me, and when I say jumped out, I don't mean it's like a big note, but because I'm hypersensitive to Ray, because I'm so familiar with him, like it's I know it can be kind of frustrating for you guys, because like 99% of this is good, and I'm like jumping on the one thing that's not. Well, it's not even not good. It's just not Ray. So anyway, what I'm noticing right off the bat is this line and this line feel very parallel on both eyelids and rings. And then the mouth itself and the lower lid sort of feel a little similar too. So kind of overall, what I'm kind of feeling is Ray is feeling kind of like those like sort of half circle crescent moon shapes kind of all over the place. And it's kind of distracting me a little bit because none of the features are kind of popping the way that I kind of want them to when there are those elements of contrast. So what I kind of went in and tried to do was I tried to get the mouth a little flatter and kind of give it like an overall sort of line of action. So the mouth is a little flatter, and we're really sort of picking up on the change in direction of the mouth because it is flatter. I'm sort of making the lower lids a little more angular, and then the top lids also angular. And I'm kind of adjusting the top lids to have a little bit of, a very slight little bit of kind of opening up with the eye direction. And then the rings are cascading away. So we're getting a little bit more of a sense that the design is sort of pulling us towards the brow. The lower lids and the upper lids are feeling like kind of distinct shapes. And then we're getting kind of that overall line of action of the mouth with that flatter and then more clear angle change with the smile. That'll make sense?
Yes.
Cool. So, again, when you sort of toggle between the two, it's kind of minor differences, and sometimes it's sort of hard to even pick up on kind of what these differences are. Kind of the easiest way to sort of get a lot of these relationships back working is, as always, just to, this won't help you with the mouth, but at least with the upper face, you can just kind of reset everything. And then you can kind of start to see how important it is that we kind of have that, that top ring not feeling perfectly parallel, how we can kind of feel like there is that sort of overall trapezoid shape to the top lid, and how kind of there's that difference in kind of where the where that trapezoid actually sort of angles in kind of like the top and lower lid. So it's kind of it's all sort of kind of there in the default, and then we're just sort of trying to like change the expression around the default design, like kind of like basically changing the lines to sculpt the expression but not changing the design itself. So this next expression, for me, I just kind of wanted to get a little bit more clarity. Like what I kind of see first here is I feel like this and this are almost like sort of equally weighted. Like I'm kind of drawn to the top lid and the open eye sort of equally. So that's kind of a little hard for me to sort of to kind of register the eye a little bit, because they're equally weighted on his face. Like there's kind of nothing that's sort of either drawing my attention away or towards a single feature there. And then the brows are feeling a bit low, like they're kind of below the ears, although I may have actually matched that. I can't remember. If I did, then I'll probably raise them up a little bit. And then like just a little bit of clarity on the rings. Like I think the rings can just be a little bit more clear. And the frown just feels a little too much like sort of the, like this part of the mouth feels flat. And then it just sort of feels like kind of that just sort of pulls down. So it's feeling a little bit like kind of like just thirds of the mouth. Like this is a third, this is a third, and this is a third. And these 2/3 just sort of feel like they're kind of turning down, not really associated with the rest of the mouth. Mm. So what I've done is I've sort of changed the relationships. This way it's more like 2/3 closed, 1/3 open. And that way you kind of really register that the top lid is really rolled down. And even though you're kind of seeing less of the open eye, you're communicating the same thing because you're communicating that the eye is closed, which happens when the eye rolls down and looks down. A little bit more clarity on the rings, like just sort of like an easier shape that sort of more easily mirrors the brows. And then I just kind of overall tried to kind of give a very subtle sort of wedge through kind of the eye mask there. And then on the mouth, I just tried to sort of make that feel a little bit less like thirds by sort of just kind of making sort of the middle of the mouth a little bit of a bigger sort of shape, and really kind of using the lower lid to sort of unify the whole mouth. So this makes sense. Any questions on this?
Yeah, thank you. Got it.
Cool. And then little differences on this too. The first thing that sort of jumped out at me was kind of how high the mouth is on yours. This is yours. And then sort of kind of this Cro-Magnon feeling right there. Like kind of like the brow is sort of overall sort of pushed a little bit too far forward. And then just kind of like, again, like very subtle sort of disassociation. Like I kind of feel like this negative space here doesn't quite feel married to this negative space here, because we're kind of getting as much sort of empty space there as we are there. So it's kind of sort of drawing our attention in two different directions. Like our kind of, we're not really getting that whole sense of unification, like lines sort of all pulling towards the forehead and kind of giving us that sense that everything is kind of pinching there and kind of coming to that center point. So just that idea of kind of like really drawing attention in and kind of really trying to sort of reinforce the idea that the brow is kind of affecting the whole eye mask, and that everything is kind of furrowing in and giving us that sort of direction change, that horizontal line that really sort of strongly communicates to us that the brow is coming in and then pulling up a little bit. So just really looking for clarity and really kind of trying to use that sort of idea to actually sort of reinforce even the eye direction. Like really making sure that the highest point on the lid is right above kind of the center point of the eye. And then just sort of dropping that mouth down and trying to kind of like reinforce that M shape. So this way it's just a little bit more distinction between the top and the bottom lip. This all makes sense? Any questions on this expression?
Yeah, I have one question. The highest point of the lid, it has to be in the exact in between of the pupil, right? It's always...
When the eye is open, it helps if you can kind of get the sense that, like basically what we're always trying to do is reinforce the idea that the eye is a sphere. So we always kind of want the pupil to really sort of be at the center of the sphere. So anything that we can kind of do to graphically kind of keep the highest point right above the center of the pupil, that's going to be good. But when we get expressions, when we drop the lid down or anything like that, it's not always going to be quite as, it's not always going to be right in the center point, because in this case, when the lid is actually brought down, because it's dimensional, the lower lid is going to be curved, and it's actually going to sort of overlap. So kind of like the lowest point of the lid at this point is going to be directly over the pupil. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so, and then depending on your expression as well, like if your brow is like really, really compressed down, let's use black, you know, then kind of like you're not actually going to see the highest point of the pupil, because the brow might actually be occluding it. So it's going to sort of depend on the expression a little bit and what the eye is doing. But when the eye is open, we generally try to kind of get that idea. Anything that can kind of make the eye feel more like a sphere and more like a three-dimensional kind of object rolling around in the skull.